And
Yo,
one
yo,
and two. Hey, hey, hey.
what's going on?
What is going on?
Oh, the usual, man. Just getting ready to have another great episode here. This
Nice.
one's gonna be dicey.
Yeah, this one is gonna be fun, I think. Hopefully we get quite a few people in here talking about their sugar shit. That's what I'm gonna call it.
Did you
Um,
say sugar shit?
their sugar shit. Anything sugar. Anything and everything sugar. Their beliefs about sugar, their experience with sugar, whatever the heck it is. So just all encompassing sugar shit.
Yeah, everybody's got something to say about sugar, typically, don't they?
Yeah, man, and it's just doesn't it always it just never makes sense to me, but I think it is like a pretty natural thing that we people do is like we kind of look for a scapegoat or a bad guy or like the big reason why why something could be happening. And for some reason in the fitness industry, one of those big bad guys has been sugar. Sugar has been pointed to as the villain or the problem for so many different things. And I think if we just take like a pretty normal uh like view or a little like a normal dive into like what sugar is, the same way we would with any other nutrient or any other ingredient, that we can start to like try to distill like what the heck is going on. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just like a pretty common problem, and for some reason this one has stuck like really well. Sugar is bad, right? This or yeah,
Yeah,
this
one of the
idea
main ones on the hamster wheel keeps going
has
around and around.
yeah, has stuck around, and sugar has become yeah this big talking point absolutely everywhere. It doesn't like why not flour? Like I guess flour kind of has here sometimes, but like why not any other ingredient? You know, is like what I always ask and what I like try to get people to think about, like when we're villainizing or demonizing like specific ingredients or specific substances. So that's just like my like initial thought, like is that it is kind of weird, but people just like kind of jump past that first like thought. Is like, no, sugar could be the bad guy and it could be the reason that I am having these problems.
Yeah, man, this is gonna be a dicey one. So people who are peeping in now to watch this, hopefully you guys have watched our previous episodes, kind of going over a lot of the fundamentals that we'll likely touch on as we go through dispelling some of the nonsense that comes with the whole sugar is bad for you situation.
Hmm.
And yeah, if you got some pre-existing beliefs on it for whatever reason, I'm sure everybody here does to some extent. Pop them in the chat. Let us know how you feel about sugar. Does it cause weight gain? Does it not? Is it the devil? Is it not? I'm already seeing some interesting comments come in, but
Yeah.
yeah, man, sugar is a something that's near and dear to people in our culture, at least in America, and it is something that is found in very healthy foods and drinks, and also very unhealthy items as well as it pertains to right from a macro and micronutrient setup in terms of balancing overall health, right? And being able to dispel energy balance and overall health and how all these things, come together and form as one, one stable system that hopefully works well. It's a difficult conversation, so we have to be careful in the way we navigate it. But overall, I think people here are going to hopefully get a really good and unique slash honest perspective on what the actual situation is versus what you've been told. Because that's kind of what we have to kind of come in here and do is dispel honestly like decades of bad truths, bad habits, bad relationship with these foods, and remove yourselves from individual experiences and look back on the science, the peer-reviewed meta-analysis studies, and understanding what we know so far that has largely been conveyed for a long period of time. And yeah, I know Exercise has got some stuff to say about it, but I hope everybody in the chat's doing good. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I'm kind of just zipping through some of the first people throwing chats up here. So good to see all of you. Maybe some of you were over at the live stream for the Hex conference that's going on in Vegas right now. If you are tuning in after that, welcome, welcome, welcome. Like Ryan over there said, we've been doing kind of like a series trying to address like some of the big issues that we kind of estimate as holding people back from really achieving some of the health and fitness goals and that are really pervasive throughout the country and the world today. And somewhere along the way, that led us to this hot topic, which I think is a super fun topic. A lot of people get pretty attached to it, but the topic of sugar. I can't remember exactly which episode it was that it came up, but we were addressing chat, and of course, lots of times we see um, interesting comments, and one of those just happened to be sugar. So I think one of the things we're going to continue to try to do is kind of address common issues that come up as we go through these episodes. So sugar, I think, being one of them, we've seen lots of comments about, and it relates directly back to a lot of these different topics that we touched on in each episode. So as opposed to our previous episodes where it's really kind of set up the fundamentals and the framework and the mindset for creating a healthy lifestyle or healthy outcomes, this one's more of a deep dive into like sugar in and of itself. So I already saw one in here, and I'm not sure if, again, I'm already getting trolled or not, but somebody's referring to it as poison. So this is one of the polarized
He's
opinions.
actually holding a glass of sugar in his hand in that profile pic. So maybe he was trolling you. I think that's
Okay.
what it looks like, wine there. I can't tell, but it looks like a wine glass.
Okay, so this is like one of the polarizing opinions, and it's actually a pretty common opinion of the substance sugar that like is around today. And I think like you'd find a surprising amount of people that do agree with that. So the American epidemic, lots of people talk about how sugar in America is an epidemic, or it is causing so many problems. Who else do we have in here? Inviting Freedom, great to see you. Brissology, that was one of our mods in here. Someone's having banana chocolate for Valentine's Day.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Um, I need help getting off sugar. Please help. Well, I'm gonna kind of talk about sugar in a much more neutral stance. This is the stance that
Yeah.
I like to take, or at least I think I like to take about most things. Um, is to really just try to boil it down to its fundamentals, what it is, what it can do, like what are the outcomes we've seen in the research? Is sugar really living up to this hype or to this rumor that it's a bad guy? Like Ryan, do you think sugar has some sort of evil agenda where it's plotting to get back at us and be like, hey, man, you guys, you've been farming us for years and years. We're coming back to get you.
No, to that comment, that comment of
Right?
American epidemic, I think it's pretty obvious that there is an epidemic, but if people are watching our earlier episodes, this is coming from, obesity. And there's so many layers to what can create a situation where a male or female becomes obese based on whatever standard you're looking at. And sugar is honestly a very, very small but important part of that because there are so many things that go into it, right? So that's why we really have to be able to pull away from our personal situations, our real world life experiences, because that is not at all going to be a real indication typically of the actual understanding of the problem. And that's a big thing I see is people typically bring in emotional reactions to things because, well, I know so and so, or this runs in my family, this and that. We can't have an honest conversation if that's going to be brought in. So I definitely encourage people to kind of try to turn off all of that for a second and come in with an open frame of mind, because some of the stuff we say is going to challenge a lot of what you guys have likely been told for a while. I even saw somebody who said he or she was avoiding sugar because diabetes runs in the family. And sugar is not a direct cause of diabetes. Exercise can go on and on about this, but typically obesity and a high sugar intake and a low activity level all conjoined together can create a situation that is advantageous for diabetes to start forming or becoming pre-diabetic. So some of these misunderstandings can really make a person, a family, a generation's worth of individuals, right, passing on to kids, and therefore going further beyond just yourself, of misinformation with this stuff. So yeah, you already know what I'm going to say on a lot of this, but I'm sure someone in here will be
Mm-hmm.
hearing it for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, yeah, we both have pretty moderate dispositions when it comes to like
Yeah.
anything I think that we've spoken on. And we both agree that whenever like there's a blanket statement being made, that you can almost always make that statement in the reverse if you give specific context or nuance. So I get like this again is gonna be a common theme with me throughout this whole series is like if I hear the statement that sugar is bad or sugar is evil, yeah, I'll be like, well, why? Like sugar is a substance. It's a compound. Is sugar in and of itself evil? No. Is sugar inherently good? Mm, No, not necessarily, right? So we can apply that same thought process to almost every other nutrient or every other compound you could think of. Like if I think of protein, is protein quote unquote good? No, it's not virtuous, right? Is it bad? No, again,
That's
no,
a good way
right?
to word it.
It's not,
Protein's very virtuous. What are
right?
you
It's
kidding,
not
man?
an evil thing. These are things that exist, and like we have a great library of data and information at our fingertips to really go about understanding them and then kind of trying to make a decision for you, the individual, right? So when we're talking about this, like if you, the individual, has had success with eliminating sugar, that is great, and I applaud you and that effort. The thing that we are here to dispel is the idea that sugar is quote evil or sugar is bad or even that it's necessarily the problem when it comes to progress or healthy outcomes. Because as far as I can tell, it's not. It definitely is contributing in a lot of ways, but it in isolation is not the issue, from what I can tell. Um, so yeah, I've gone back to my default, which is I just like kind of typed up a few slides really quick. Just if I had no idea what sugar was and I just thought it was evil, that's kind of like the disposition that I tried to start from. And I'm just going to take you through kind of my thought process when I try to look at really anything, whether it's sugar, whether it is some sort of legitimate poison. Like poison exists in nature. It is a natural compound. So it's again to say things are like good or bad or like have bad outcomes, that is one thing in and of itself, but to go over and classify something as bad overall is like it's just taking steps too far without actually taking into account what is going on. So let's pull it up, unless you got anything else before I pull that up. Ryan, you got anything else before I pull that up?
I'll say one thing,
Sure.
guys. There is a big difference because Inviting Freedom made a good comment about reading studies that state things that have effects on the brain and how these things interact with each other.
Mm-hmm.
There's a big difference between rebuilding someone's relationship with food, because anything in excess can cause some serious damage in that way, versus the actual math, data, and science that supports it, right? So taking someone's situation who may have um, taken in a large, abundant intake of sugar over a decade period of time. It has very, very high dependence levels on it, and has built this pre-existing relationship with it. Is not really what we're identifying today, right? That's kind of like the relationship with food, and that could be a whole other, really episode on strategizing how to pull someone away from that and building a much better and more balanced relationship with it. Manipulating their metabolism to do so. This is more so on the side of we're dispelling myths as it pertains to X, Y, and Z are good or bad for you. In this case, sugar, as it pertains to its relationship to the human body, to weight gain, weight loss, etc. That's all we're talking about, right? That's kind
Mm-hmm.
of what I would hope that people can kind of shift their focus towards. Not that we probably won't answer questions like that. But yeah, I just want to make that clear. The
Mm-hmm.
emotional relationship is a very separate thing. And obviously, let's be honest, Americans typically have very interesting relationship with food that has been built. This is not something that just happens the day you're born, and kind of leads into exercise and stuff he's about to get into. Like, this is not something that is just there and poisonous or less virtuous, by default. It's typically
Yeah.
something that is created in a cultural environment or excess, et cetera. There's a lot of layers to this problem overall, but just wanted to
Mm-hmm.
identify that there's a huge separation between those two things. And because he's about to get into a lot of the science, data, and math of what we know up until this point, which is many, many decades of research so far that
Mm-hmm.
kind of paint an obvious picture. So I'll let you get
Yeah.
into it.
Yeah, maybe before I do, I'll just pull up. I saw another question in there. We'll try to answer here before we get too far down the chat here. I have a hard time kicking candy. Recently came up with a trick. Instead of eating candy, I'll pop a couple gummy vitamins. What do you think? I imagine the gummy vitamins are kind of expensive. So,
That's fair.
but
Everything's going up though in price, as we know. But
if you want to kick candy because like that's putting you over your calories for the day, or you have some other goal, then and that's helping you, like I don't really see a problem with it. It'll be like
no,
pretty expensive in terms of like why not just have two candies, you know, instead of two vitamin gummies. So like you might be getting some extra vitamins here. The data on multivitamins there's another good one for one day.
That'd be a
Data on
good one I would like to hear about
mhm.
because I'm not super polished on that one.
The data on multivitamins isn't great. It's like pretty meh. It's like if you are in like a normal situation, it's like there's not really any positive data on them.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say it's a bad thing, but like if that's what is working for you, then cool. Um, and yeah, the only real reason I see to like fully kick candy, like if you're having a hard time like meeting your macro goals or your dietary goals, and that's putting you out of or over your caloric intake. That's the only reason I really see to quote unquote kick candy, you
Yeah.
know?
Typically, I see stuff like that too when someone's like relationship with food is not necessarily like in a good spot because hunger is typically not regulated or their macronutrient balance is kind of like out of whack. So if your calorie count's
Mm,
regulated day to day, for example, but you're eating specifically mostly just carbs and most of your meals are just carbs and fats, hunger isn't regulated as well. The way your body breaks down those macronutrients are very different, and the way your hunger responds to that is very different too. So I would look to pair maybe your carb, whether it be candy. I'm not gonna, say it's good or bad in this kind of the conversation, but like if you were to pair candy with some sort of protein intake and maybe in a veggie with it too, not that many people would be like, oh, like Skittles and broccoli and chicken, right? For example, but you would feel very different, in terms of the psychological and how you feel in general about closing that meal out versus needing to like go back to it too. So I mean, that could be its own episode too. We don't want to get too in depth
mhm.
here on these answers.
Yeah. Yeah, this was the one you were referencing, I think.
Yeah.
If you're referencing the study, I think you are inviting freedom. These usually just use a fMRI scan of the brain to see where activity is going on. So activity is occurring in similar places in the brain, but this is usually a red herring, as like that occurs for basically anything that you enjoy. So that could be a hug. It could be uh, if you enjoy like apples might do the same thing, right? So just so to equate
Mm.
like your brain lighting up in certain areas, it's like it is a jump, and I find it like pretty disingenuous by like the studies or the people who are trying to at least use that study to infer any sort of like actual useful meaning. To me, it just means like, hey, like the pleasure center is active, right? The pleasure center of your brain is active on cocaine, and like sugar tastes good. Most people enjoy the taste of sugar. So,
It's fair.
so like Ryan was saying there is for sure a very complex relationship with food and in particular sugar that some individuals might have that this like might relate to. But when people try to equate things like that, it's like so what? Like I don't really see the useful interpretation there. It's like anything you enjoy lights up the
Yeah,
brain.
there's a phrase that's good for that. It's correlation doesn't always mean causation,
Yeah,
right?
correlation is not causation. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's actually perfect for the sugar. I mean, that's going to be probably something that we could refer back to quite a bit as
Hmm.
people kind of say some stuff about it. But yeah,
Yeah. Maybe one more here, and then I'll pull her up. Added slash processed
oh
sugars
man, you're
are
gonna
the
have a field day on
worst.
that one.
Um, First, added is I think it's just when you add sugar to a recipe. So I'm not sure that's the worst. And processed, um, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by processed. Maybe you just mean table sugar, as in sucrose. But again, I would say like 90% of our food is processed, so it's really tough to like put like just use a blanket statement or a blanket label like this and say, hey, any processed sugar is bad. It's like okay, so if it's like natural sugar, does it have a different outcome than if it's made in a lab, or is it still just like that compound at its base level, and will it still have a similar effect? So with that, I will pull up my traditional slideshow. This is what I revert to almost every time I try to think.
Exercise classic.
Every time I try to think of like how to get across like my idea, I like just automatically think of how I could put it up on a board or like talk about it and like just click through slides. I love clicking through slides and talking and just like kind of riffing and taking questions and just like shooting the shit, really. So that's kind of my default, and that's what I'm going to do here again. So hopefully I don't lose too much interest. I don't think it's a huge slideshow, 17 slides. So if there's ever a time you feel like I'm going going off the deep end, Ryan, maybe just pull me back in with a pretty normal question. I'm gonna try to keep it within the rails here and very, very simple. Right?
We could answer questions throughout the slides.
Yeah,
We'll
absolutely.
pop questions in.
Absolutely. Okay. So the first place I started, again, I tried to come from imagining I had no information on the subject, no information about what sugar was, but somebody told me that, yo, sugar's the devil or sugar's evil. Sugar is out to get you. Okay, let's go through that and really try to understand what it is and then try and investigate some of the claims that people make around sugar. Right, so when you hear about sugar, sugar falls into one of our macronutrient categories. You guys should remember macronutrients from maybe episode 2. These are energy containing. Now, water is the exception to this rule, but sugar would fall into the classification of a carbohydrate. So carbohydrates, I don't think are bad, but let's go investigate that a little bit deeper. When we talk about carbs, lots of people, you've probably heard the term simple and complex, right? As that relates to carbohydrates, we term that in the number, like the size of the chain. So a saccharide is basically the complex or the way that a carbohydrate is formed. Like if you've taken chemistry or organic chemistry, you're probably seen some structures of saccharides. So we can see them as simple as one chain. So when we say mono, that's a single saccharide. When we see di, that's two saccharides. And then when we see poly, that's more than two. This term oligosaccharide isn't used that often. Poly usually just means as soon as we get to more, 3 or more. So monosaccharides, a single saccharide, disaccharides are quite simple. And these are the sugars or the saccharides, the carbs that you're pretty familiar with. So when we talk about monosaccharides, things that fall into this category would be things like glucose, fructose, and galactose. And these, now there's more than just these 3 monosaccharides, but these are definitely the most common and form the building blocks of a lot of the larger polysaccharides out there. So sugar is not the only saccharide, right? There's many, many saccharides. When we think about sugar itself, so glucose, you might say, hey, glucose, is glucose sugar? Now, it kind of is. That's the other thing about this term sugar is that it's not really that descriptive. When really, when most people are talking about sugar, they're referring to this disaccharide of sucrose. Sucrose is table sugar, and it's a combination of 2 monosaccharides. So when these monosaccharides chain together, we get disaccharides or polysaccharides, right? So sucrose, the traditional sugar, is just 2 of these glucose strung together to equal sugar. So 2 glucose molecules or 2 saccharides. Now we've got both of these side by each or chained together, linked together. We have a disaccharide, and now we have sugar. Now, I guess you could boil down basically any element or any compound down to this level. But to me, like when we're down here looking at like what it is and like the formula and the shape and stuff, it really helps, I think, just like detach um, your emotion from it or like your personal identity with sugar. And it's like, hey, this is what it is. Like, is galactose bad? I don't hear many people like talking shit about lactose. Lactose is the combination of glucose and galactose, right? So is galactose evil? Is it causing big problems in our health outcomes today? I'm not so sure, but for some reason, there's this huge narrative that sugar is. Hmm, not so sure. And then our polysaccharides, again, just longer strings, right? So we've got multiple saccharides linked together here. So now if glucose or if sugar is bad, if I link a whole bunch of those together, does that become even worse? Or
Usually it's even better, right? The
right?
complex carbs are
Or is
typically
that,
something that's labeled as something that's better for most
yeah,
people.
right? So,
You hear
or
that narrative a lot too.
mhm. In general, if you're in this world of like sugar or carbs or simple and complex carbs, lots of people would tell you that, hey, complex carbs are good, simple carbs are bad. Well, the complex carbs are just combinations of these simple carbs. So if complex carbs are good, does what is making them up? Does that make their components also good? I don't know. So again, like just some interesting ways to look at like the actual like compound, what it is, and to try and detach like from this overarching idea that like, hey, remember that's bad. Like it's tough to see if it's bad when we distill it down to here, right? So carbohydrates are extremely useful. So right at the start there, we said like sugar is a carb. I don't think carbs are bad, so maybe there's something more unique to sugar. We use carbohydrate daily in your metabolism for movement. If you are moving, you are using some form of carbohydrate inside of your body. Now, the main ways that we use that is through glucose. Well, that sounds good. Like if I need to move, I need to use glucose to create energy. Okay. Glucose can be stored as glycogen. Glycogen, I don't hear people talking shit about glycogen.
Nope.
Glycogen
One
is
of
just
the
the stored form of glucose. I think, as a matter of fact, I think a lot of people really like glycogen and want to store more glycogen and talk about
yeah.
glycogen benefits, et cetera, et cetera. But glycogen is just the storage form of glucose, i.e., a sugar. So is glycogen bad as well? So just a lot like as you're investigating different ideas or different substances, just kind of like go through with, I would say like a skeptical mind and be like, hey, is this bad or is this good? So then I'm like, well, okay, if glucose is good, like here's where it plays a part like in your actual glycolysis. It comes right in here, turns into glucose 6 phosphate and goes down the line of glycolysis. So I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on this. This is like pretty deep bioenergetic stuff. But glucose is extremely useful and it is used day in and day out within your metabolism. So if we look at an overarching picture of kind of what's happening and where we're drawing for what we're drawing from for an energy source, oftentimes we're pulling from glucose a lot. We can also pull from fat, right? Fat can go into a few different areas. It can go into glycolysis or it can go down into the Krebs cycle. Same with protein. Protein can go a few different areas. It most often goes into Krebs cycle. So this is how the body uses sugar. To me, it seems like there is no problematic issue that can really arise here, right? In the same way that we use protein or fat, like we don't really categorize. I guess we kind of do categorize fat as being bad, but
That's a whole other
right
problem. People
again,
just
that's
totally
an
misuse that term in
right.
America.
People just
Oh God, it's a
like to
whole.
kind of like attribute these like intentions to different compounds or different foods, and it's like, well, like there might be negative outcomes that can occur, but it's not in isolation. It's not because of that ingredient per se. So that's kind of like my distillation down of like what sugar is and like where I would start just to like think about sugar coming in, and then as it comes into the body, like what is it really doing inside of the body? Well, that is what it is more or less doing. So some of the common claims I see when it comes to sugar and like overarching throughout the fitness world is that sugar makes you gain weight or it makes you fat. Sugar causes inflammation. Fructose is bad.
We
Fructose,
just had a comment that just said HFCS is bad
oh yeah.
too. Once again, not knocking anybody, just like the
Hmm.
timing of that was like crazy. Like you
Hmm.
went to the slide. I think inviting for you put a comment in there that said literally your third point. I was like, holy crap.
Yeah. So fructose is bad, or some people even go so far as to say fruit is bad or fruit is unhealthy, or high fructose corn syrup, that's what HFCS is, or a claim just as simple as sugar is bad for you. So all of these are like pretty broad. So anytime somebody makes a claim, again, try to investigate like exactly what the heck they mean. Like when I see sugar makes you gain weight, well, there's no mechanism that I'm aware of where sugar is going and stopping you from expending calories and making you gain weight. There's no mechanism that I'm aware of where sugar is making any sort of fat as a product, right? Sugar does not violate the rules of energy balance, right? It's just another ingredient. It's another macronutrient that goes back to this fundamental proposition that we talked about back in episode 1 that we kind of is going to dictate the way we view a lot of the world. And if something ends up breaking that, then we got to go back and reassess. Sugar does
Mhm.
not break these rules. Sugar is a carbohydrate that goes right into this energy balance equation. So if you are gaining weight, you are not in a calorie deficit.
And could that
If
all be from carbs and sugar only? Sure,
is that
could. Is
right?
that likely? Probably not. You
Mhm,
probably have a mixture of all three.
right. So is that because of sugar? Because you are choosing to ingest sugar? No, right? Sugar can add to the tally of energy going
Mhm.
in, but it's not like, oh, sugar was in this meal, so sugar is going to make this a tougher day to lose weight. Like none of this is happening. It's the exact same mechanism as if you added in protein or if you added in any sort of calorie containing item into the recipe, right? This fundamental underlying assumption of energy balance is not changing. All right, so that's that first one, and there's a whole bunch here that like these were some of the best studies that I found. Maybe I'll try and put these in the show notes or something. And the summary here is that sugar does not cause weight gain when there is not a calorie surplus. So there's a whole bunch of different studies here where they looked at people on high sugar, low sugar, high sugar, keto, so next to no carbs, and all the outcomes are extremely similar. There is just I have not seen like when the study is set up and the parameters are set up in the proper way, there is just no study that compares them properly and draws an outcome where it's like, oh, it looks like the group with sugar like was way different because of the sugar. It hasn't occurred yet that I've seen. Right? If you have studies, if you have evidence, if you have something like that, I please I would encourage you to share it with us, share it with me. You can find me in lots of places. I will take a look and I will talk to you till the cows come home about that study. So there's a whole bunch here. I'll pull up one of them really quick. Why can I not
You have to
just
control click on it.
yeah, I'm on draw there just a sec.
Oh, gotcha.
Just
Yeah.
gotta just gotta be careful here. Come on. No.
Hey, inviting freedom. We appreciate you being honest, honestly, because like I'm going to be honest. Like before I got into this 7 years ago, I had terrible misconceptions. I'm not saying you do have them. I'm just saying in general, America's relationship with food, their relationship with the facts, is like even worse than the state of crypto. Think of crypto where Richard's trying to come in and bring truth telling to the space and how much flack he gets and misinformation and how many people
Mhm.
with large audiences are swaying people to BS. Take that and multiply it by 100. And then you have the overall health and wellness industry and the
Mhm.
nutrition industry. And then you have, all the other stuff that goes along with it, healthcare, right? Reactive based. So yeah, this is a difficult beast that we're talking about here, but it's an important one, because the more you can kind of get back to the fundamentals, what we talked about in the first episode, the more you're able to understand, identify what's actually going on and make sense of this stuff incredibly quickly without any layering of like self belief and previous existing, beliefs about it getting in the way.
Mhm. Yeah, so here's one of those studies that I found to be really good where they set up the groups with similar diets, similar protein, similar fiber, and they looked at 4 different groups. So different levels of sucrose, sugar. Remember, sucrose was like a little bit different than some of the other sugars, or HFCS, high fructose corn syrup, on weight loss and related parameters. So 4 different groups. So I'm not going to go into the entire thing. If you'd like to spend some time going into an entire thing, it's probably better to go. I'm not sure of a great space to go and do that, but I love doing that. So reach out to me and I'll go back and forth with you about it. But basically, they set up the study in a great way where things were controlled to actually look at how they change the diets, right? If we put one group on sugar and put them in a calorie surplus where they're gaining weight, and then put another group in a calorie deficit where they're losing weight, we're just not comparing the same outcomes. It's going to be impossible to draw any conclusions there, right? So here, no matter what they did, high sucrose, low sucrose, high fructose corn syrup, right? We saw very similar decreases in weight, indices of adiposity when they were fed hypocaloric. So every group was on a hypocaloric diet on the different levels of sucrose and HFCS. We saw extremely similar things. So this is one of the more powerful ones. I think there was a systematic review in there that was also really powerful. All of these I found to be set up in great ways. So the summary here, when we're looking at like the weight gain or the weight loss, is that sugar does not, like when sugar is added into these groups as like a controlled variable or as a variable, it doesn't have a huge significant effect in positive or negative terms. We see extremely similar outcomes. It's just another macro and energy containing item. That's all it seems to be, right? It is not breaking this rule.
Now, guys, let's be clear too. This is in a controlled study group, right? When you throw in culture in America, when you throw in restaurants, when you throw in peer pressure, when you throw in decades of influence from maybe your family relationship with food, events, holidays, this is where the stigmas kind of come out of, because maybe there is a situation where sugar is the more prevalent thing for whatever reason in your life or people's lives around you that seems to be the culprit, right? Because it's just not, let's be honest, it's not common where someone's like, hey, I'm going to go overeat 6 chicken breasts. Let's just do that on Halloween. That ain't happening. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So you're not going to see protein be the bad player here, but there's actually a good comment, man. I think you should pull this comment out because you just talked about it from Poutmaster in terms of sugar promoting weight gain or promotes the growth of adipose tissue. Neither of those apply. We're strictly talking about its actual fundamental process, the way your body sees it, breaks it down, and interacts with it. We're not talking about a mental relationship with it and your choice to eat it as a human. This is just the hard facts. So if you take like a robot and had them do this and always make the right decision with this stuff, this is the outcome you would see, right? But when you bring in the psychological, the only thing, once again, that's going to cause weight gain is being a calorie surplus. That could be all protein all day, every day, man. You could eat nothing but protein all day, every day and still gain body fat and be in a calorie surplus. Mm-hmm. So to say sugar promotes it, it's just you're kind of missing the mark of the underlying fundamentals here. Because nothing about sugar promotes weight gain. Like exercise says, there's nothing about its process that aids or detracts in that way, you know, from being in a caloric deficit. So in that regard, remember, emotional relationships, psychological relationships, cultural pressure, you know, structural issues as it pertains to the restaurants, all these things we have available to us, that is totally outside of this conversation. Let this conversation allow you to build like the foundation of what the process actually is doing. Then apply it as you see fit. Because maybe you are someone who doesn't think a higher sugar diet would work for you for X, Y, and Z reasons. Maybe you are, right? That doesn't change what we're talking about, but for your unique and individual situation, it could, you know, be that way or the opposite, you know? And feel free to, I didn't know if you wanted to touch on that too with the comment there.
No, 100% agree. Like sugar is not, it's an isolated compound. It's not promoting, like in the bigger environment is what will influence the direction here, right? In a caloric surplus, sure, but then everything is promoting weight gain in a caloric surplus. You know, like if you're eating broccoli in a caloric surplus, broccoli is promoting weight gain and growth of adipose tissue, right? So there's nothing that the compound of sugar is doing itself to promote weight gain. Now, I will get to the part where I do like have a few admissions about sugar, but and like this is almost close to touching on that part, but sugar itself is not like in the game of promoting weight gain, right? It's an energy containing nutrient that's going into the body. Your body is going to process it and use it the way it uses it. If that environment is hypercaloric or caloric surplus, there will be some weight gain. Will it be exclusively because of sugar? No. There will be some adipose tissue growth. Will it be exclusively because of sugar? No.
You made a great point about the broccoli thing, because most people would never, ever like touch on broccoli as like a bad thing. It's like, guys, when you're budgeting, right, and you're over budget by $100, all the dollars that went into that overage accounted for it, right? So whether you had one purchase that was $2 and one purchase that was $50, yeah, maybe you put more effort into the $50 purchase, but then we're talking about overall energy intake again. And when you look at the actual macronutrients, fats are typically the highest calorie count in general. And correct me if I'm wrong, exercise, I believe also in terms of the thermic effect of food, going to take the least amount of energy for your body to break down. So it typically has just the highest cost overall, period. So if anything, what I see most of the time, it's not actually sugar that is accounting for higher levels of intake without people realizing it. It's fat content, because typically fats can come in ways you don't see, like oils, dressings that you can miss kind of construe as a lower calorie count. And they're just a higher cost per what it is you're getting per gram. So if we're actually talking about just calorie surplus and the higher numbers are bad, carbs are not necessarily the highest on that list either anyways, you know. And I'm not saying that fats are bad for you either from a macronutrient perspective, right? Poison is in the dosage, but just kind of to shift the narrative and shift the way you guys are approaching this, this is very much so simple in that regard. Like, treat this a bit more simply, then layer it as it pertains to your unique situation to make it fit the narrative or fit your situation better.
All right. So this is what's my first argument here is sugar and weight gain. The other thing I wanted to bring up here was just this relationship that people believe like sugar is responsible for like this big problem that's going on, and it's actually been decreasing in consumption in America, especially for like quite some time.
What? I have not seen this. What?
Yeah. So for a long time, so a lot of people like to point the finger back at like the sugar drink industry and be like, hey, as soon as you guys started adding sugar to shit, which is somewhere around here, we started to go to the moon in terms of like waistlines and obesity. And that's not completely false, but is that what was responsible? Well, it was probably that paired with a whole bunch of things, right? And more recently, we've seen sugar consumption start to depart from this general trend of waistlines and obesity and BMIs going straight up. So is sugar still the bad guy here? I'm not sure exactly what the sugar or the people who say that like sugar is evil have to say to like this data, but it's like it seems to me it probably isn't. But
and that's
again,
from the CDC.
yeah, man, like it's pretty legit
CDC is
information.
one of the most like prevalent, and I mean everybody's very much so aware of the CDC now because of, you know, what's been going on in the world, but they're really up to date with trends on obesity. If you guys really want to just go to the truth too, like they have the best stuff there. Not only trends for adults, but trends for adults across every state, how states are different for childhood obesity. They have some really good stuff on their website.
Yeah. So this is that first claim. Sugar makes you gain weight or makes you fat. The next claim that's extremely common, and you see this with a lot of things, not just sugar anymore, is that sugar causes quote unquote inflammation. And whenever I see this, I almost cringe now because I'm like, what? Can you please be more specific? Like sugar and what inflammation where? What inflammation is sugar specifically causing? And again, so all the information I found, I'll stop pulling up all these different ones because there's a butt ton of like data in there. But again, the overarching theme here is that sugar does not appear to increase inflammation in the absence of a caloric surplus. This is what seems to be extremely popular in the literature that's driving a lot of these negative outcomes is a caloric surplus. And the macronutrient makeup of that caloric surplus is not necessarily the big factor. So whether it's keto, whether it's Atkins, whether it's high carb, whether it's low carb, high protein, it doesn't really matter about the makeup of the macronutrient of the diet in terms of macronutrients. If there's a caloric surplus, that's where we start to see like the trend for driving some of these quote unquote like negative outcomes. So again, in isolation, sugar in a high sugar diet, low sugar diet, it was not any more so inflammatory. Again, I would also like pose the question, what it like to people who are making this claim, like what specifically are you referring to when you say inflammation? Like exercise is inflammatory.
Yeah.
Like there's plenty of things
There's
that
a lot of
cause
narrative breaking statements you can make to all these things.
there's many things that cause inflammation. It's like, well, what specifically are you saying or do you mean when you say inflammation? And then what specifically is that leading to? So just be very, I would say, critical and skeptical of these claims when you see them. So fructose, this is the next one. Fructose is bad. This one has, like, I would say, a little more weight to the claim, and like I can actually like see the mechanism responsible for, I guess, creating this idea and like us going down this path in the fitness world, but the data just does not bear it out. So again, found tons of stuff here. Fruit is associated with lower levels of liver fat. This is one of the people that go as far as saying, hey, fructose is the bad guy, therefore fruit must be bad because it will cause a fatty liver. Well, when we control for the energy going in, it doesn't appear that way. Fructose does not increase liver fat when substitute for another carb. So again, when you are hypercaloric, when you're taking in more calories than you are expending, we're going to see extremely similar outcomes. No difference between fructose and glucose on liver fat. There's like a butt ton there. Saturated fat appears to be like a much bigger problem here. Like saturated fat, I will agree with you. This, I'm not sure why this isn't taking headlines day in and day out over sugar.
Because it ain't sexy and it don't sell product.
I don't, yeah, right?
Because that's obvious to people, like that one is more obvious, but I don't know how the other stuff still finds its way. I can tell you, it's like crypto, man. Like, how do people still buy rug pulls? How do people still? It's like once
Yeah,
you know, and
yeah,
then you go crazy when you see other people not doing it, and you're just
yeah.
like, how is the narrative still this misconstrued?
hmm
But yeah, dude.
So fruit, if you hear somebody telling you that like fruit is bad, it's just, to me it's just like a huge red flag. Fruit is associated with lower all-cause mortality, cancer, and heart disease. Like fruit, as far as we know, is great. So high fructose corn syrup. This I'll touch on this a little bit because it's also like, I would say, just like oftentimes like misconstrued with straight up sugar. So high fructose corn syrup is not just straight up fructose. It's a mixture of glucose and fructose, usually in between 50 to 60% fructose and 40 to 50% glucose. So it's still not like straight up fructose. The uh, the misconception here kind of stems from a place of like the mechanism that occurs when fructose goes through metabolism. And a lot of fructose, it does get metabolized in the liver, and there is a spur in de novo lipogenesis, which is just a fancy term to say like fat creation, but that doesn't it hasn't it doesn't translate into anything like measurable. So if you were to like zoom in super far on this issue and look at the liver and be like, hey, de novo lipogenesis goes up when fructose comes in. It's like, well, it does, but it looks like we just go and we use like some of that fat that's created through de novo lipogenesis. So de novo lipogenesis is creating triglycerides out of non-triglycerides, and then usually we can go and use them as an energy source. So in all of these different studies where they tried to equate, right, when you equate for the energy going in, so if it's equal parts fructose versus glucose or versus whatever, again we saw no difference. So that's where that's the mechanism that I think spurred like this claim. And then this one is like a constant one, is that sugar is bad for you. It's like, okay, I think you guys know what I'm going to say. Like, what the hell does this mean? What sugar is bad for you? What do you mean? Please be more specific. So at the very end here, I just had a couple notes of like things to really watch for, like especially when people try to use data to throw in your face,
This
or
is a
like
good one. There's a
right,
lot
or
of, yeah.
to back up their claims. So be like, hey, look at this study. Look what they showed. This means sugar is bad. It's like, well, let's take a look here. So I kind of glossed over some of those studies. Like I do not recommend being an abstract scientist, so I am asking for a little bit of trust there. If you'd like to go look at those studies, go take a look at them. And if you're like, hey, dude, you're doing the exact same thing you said some people are doing, please bring it to my attention, and I would love to address it. I'm trying my best to look for studies that are actually setting them up in a neutral way so we can see what the heck is happening with the isolated variable. So one of the biggest things is to make sure that the groups have the same calories in their diets. This is an extremely common one. They'd be like, hey, the sugar group here gained 10 pounds of weight. It's like, well, they were eating way more than the other group.
Mm.
So yeah, they did, right? So in any group eating more than another group will gain more weight, right? So this is a huge one to watch out for. Make sure the groups have similar, if not the exact same kcals going in. Equal protein content. Groups should have similar protein. Ryan just mentioned this, is that protein is a little bit more costly to digest. So if we have a group that's on extremely high protein compared to another group that's low protein, well, their net kcal going in, so again, their diet is not going to be isocaloric. It's not going to end up being similar.
Yeah.
So that calorie driver is probably going to be present. That's what we see as the larger driver, is if you are taking in a calorie surplus, that is probably what is driving most of these things that sugar ends up like being targeted or claimed as being responsible for. And then one of the other big ones is equal fiber. Fiber, again, has a large effect on kcals.
Guys, think of this as like a either a stock off or like a stock that's going public, and they're just straight up lying about the float. Then they're not being honest about any of that stuff. So you go to buy it thinking you understand what's going on, but none of it is actually on strong foundational standards, right? Or initial coin offering, whatever you want to call it. So these things are essentially making sure that all the playing ground is equal and level and makes sense. And this happens all the time. Someone could cherry pick any one of these and be like, see, look at the abstract. Look at just the conclusion here. See, this is saying that sugar is bad. It's like, dude, you need to make sure these things are present, because these things drastically affects what we talked about in our first episode, which is energy balance. People are just manipulating energy balance without you realizing it or without anybody else realizing it, and then pushing the narrative again.
Yeah.
And then you see these things on bigger channels, and then you wonder why this kind of stuff still permeates, and people just still think, oh, eating after 9 o'clock is bad. Sugar's bad. Eating, just the standard things you see come up still like decades later. So yeah, this is really, really good stuff that Exercise going over for making sure your sources are credible and are doing justice to the topic they're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is what I end up seeing in a lot of the studies or information that people use to confirm. They're like, hey, found some evidence. It turns out sugar is evil. Here you go. And you'd be like, well, not so sure. Just hold up there a second. And then my last slide here are some of the admissions, I guess. The one thing that I was going to mention there earlier, I just saved it until I got here. The thing I will admit readily to you is that sugar is calorically dense, and it's very easy to eat and even overeat. It oftentimes fall into this category of being hyper palatable. Foods that are hyper palatable are very easy to over consume, especially if you are not mindful or aware of what's going on or what you're doing. So if you fall into that category of maybe like struggling with food intake, then I'm not saying I don't see how sugar could be a problem for an individual. I'm just saying like the sugar itself is not what's responsible. If I took that individual and like we could incorporate sugar, like, and I had all the control in the world, like with some of these studies, we could incorporate sugar in a normal way. If that doesn't work for that person, I can understand that. The point that I will continue to make though is that it's not like sugar itself's fault, you know? And then to follow that up, sugar can have bad health outcomes, it can have good health outcomes, it can have neutral health outcomes, just like almost every single other nutrient that you put in your mouth. Every single one. So I think, yeah, like the main thesis here is like to try to not attach these like categorical themes to these different nutrients that are part of like your normal diet, and then demonize them or champion them. Like you don't need to champion protein or fat or carbs, right? And just like we don't need to demonize sugar. It's just like it is what it is, and it can be incorporated or it can be excluded for whatever purpose, whatever goal you have in mind.
Some of these comments coming in are good.
Yeah, so that is the end. That's where I kind of finished up. That is I would say extremely brief, really, really quick, touched on like a lot of the areas. We touched on like biochem, there and the chemistry of sugar, and then tried to address quickly some of like the main claims that people see or like claim to be wrong with like the sugar itself. So yeah, let's try and go through some of those comments. How about galactose? Galactose sounds like a supervillain from space. Automatically put it in the bad category. That's yeah, galactose. One of the ingredients of lactose, but I don't hear anything bad. Well, I guess the people who are lactose intolerant probably say bad things about lactose.
Yeah.
All right, so inviting freedom, she was talking to us, or they were talking to us about some stuff at the start there. I think they were saying that we were getting them all fucked up, wherever that was. I
Yeah,
lost it.
she said that just a little bit after this
Hmm.
comment that you have up
Okay,
there. Yeah.
so we can be objective and separate added sugars versus essential sugars, i.e. glyconutrients, fruits and vegetable sugars are necessary and good versus sucrose, high fructose corn syrup, which are bad. Okay, I got a couple questions for you if you are still hanging with us. We can separate added sugars versus essential, i.e. glyconutrients. I'm not exactly sure. I don't know if I've heard that term. Glyconutrient are necessary and good versus sucrose. Again, I'm not willing to really categorize them as good or bad here. So I don't think sucrose is bad. I don't think high fructose corn syrup is quote unquote bad. Um, I'm not exactly sure. This is maybe just a little bit convoluted for me. So maybe if you could follow up here. I'm not exactly sure what you're trying to say with that one there, inviting freedom. But yeah, I think my whole thing here is to be extremely hesitant. Like there might like you might be able to name something that I would confirm as like being quote unquote bad to ingest, right? But in general, I think it's a pretty like a not very useful thing to do to categorize like sucrose. So you can find sucrose in lots of different foods, lots of sources. That's not necessarily bad. Fruit is not bad for you. Agreed. Oh yeah, here it is. Here, well, you guys are getting me all fucked up. We do not. Yeah, sorry if it is messing with, I guess like your view, but the idea here is to be neutral about the substrate and then be critical about whatever the outcome is. So it doesn't really matter what the compound is, right? Like when you look at this structure, do you look at this and be like, holy smokes, that thing's evil? No, no, right? What I care more about is like the data at the end of this. So if this equals bad bottom line data, then sure, we can talk about it potentially being bad. But if I can incorporate this in a controlled study where it's no different than complex carbs or oats, like people champion oats as being, oh my God, oats are so healthy.
Got a lot of sugar.
And I don't mean to pit them against each other. I want people to get away from championing and demonizing different
Yeah.
things. They can all be incorporated into a normal, healthy diet if you want. Some of them are a little more difficult. So like sugar I would put in the category of potentially being problematic because it's extremely hyperpalatable. So that one we talked about. Ooh, but eating sugar spikes insulin. Oh boy. Um, Eating sugar spikes insulin. It depends, I guess. I'm missing a few qualifiers here. Are you eating anything else? Are you in a fasted state? So what Chris is referring to here is the hormone insulin. Oftentimes, like a lot of these studies, so I'm guessing he's also referring to like glycemic index type of stuff. When you eat simple carbs, not just sugar, it tends to spike your insulin faster than certain other things. Now, those studies and that data is done on somebody who's fasting and that input alone. So is it really a useful metrics to say, hey, if I eat a spoonful of table sugar, my insulin spikes? Um, I'm not sure. Like if you have sugar mixed in with other macros like fat and protein, then that response is almost completely blunted. right? And there's many things that spike insulin. So it is like a pretty common claim or a common that actually could have been another one over here.
Yeah,
Common
BioLane talks about that one all
common
the time.
claim is that it spikes insulin, right? And now sometimes you want insulin, right? So it's not like necessarily bad. Like to try and isolate one event as being good or bad is again really tough to do,
Yeah.
right?
Because
So
most people use the argument that it's going to create some sort of bad environment or typically weight gain.
hmm
Like, because it's almost always like sugar's bad because of weight gain. Typically, people always like correlate those two things.
yeah.
But, we don't have the studies right here in front of us. We can get them that show, hey, spiking insulin, whether or not you're in a deficit or a calorie surplus, once again, are really going to be the main factors there as pertains to what happens when the insulin is spiked. That's
hmm
what you really care about. Because there's a number of factors that could cause that to spike in various ways.
Yeah.
And if you're worried about weight gain and your insulin spiked, but you're in 1,000 calorie deficit and you have some Skittles while still being in a deficit and your insulin spikes, who gives a shit?
Yeah.
Once again, we're trying to like come down to such a fundamental level that these one-off little, baby tiny little situations that we're trying to pin on a greater overall problem, right? Overall obesity in America, it's no bueno. It doesn't work. The science doesn't support it, unfortunately, either. I wish it was that simple. Because guys, guess what? If that was really the issue, there would be no obesity.
hmm
I promise you, and I'm sure exercise would agree that if it was really that simple, we could just fix it pretty easy right now with like one tiny little change. Like the whole industry would change. FDA would come in and be like, okay, let's make the change. And guess what? It'd be basically gone. Like it's just so many other factors that go into it. So
hmm
I'm leaping a little bit here. So Chris, I apologize if you didn't actually mean that in regards to weight gain, but that's typically where the conversation goes when
Yeah.
someone brings up sugar spiking insulin, because it's like, well, what's the point of this? Like, no duh.
hmm
Like, of course it's going to. So it's
Yeah.
like, what's the point? And then they go, oh, well, that's bad because X, Y, and Z, weight gain, whatever. It's like, okay, well, we're going back to episode 1 again.
Yeah. Yeah. So Chris, if you are still around, maybe try to follow up with like a pretty clear reason why you think like an insulin spike is bad, and
Yeah,
maybe we'll try to go from there.
for sure.
Because an insulin spike is not necessarily a bad thing. If you are diabetic, it can definitely become more complicated, obviously, but yeah, plenty of things spike insulin. Insulin is very good at clearing your blood sugar when blood sugar is too high. That's that's what it's for. That's what it does. Yeah. Scientific studies are whack. Is TA on crypto sometimes? Yeah, there's
That
if
was
you
a
go to
funny one.
PubMed or Google Scholar, you'll find, and you just type in like sugar and weight gain, you'll probably find a million. And in those million, there'll be, yeah, 500,000 shitty ones. So be very critical and skeptical out there. Here, I like this comment. I'm just going to give it one change. Everything is evil depends on the dose amount you eat. This is something Ryan and I have also like mentioned in the past. The dose, the death is in the dose, I think is the little quip. And I will try to change not everything is evil, but everything can be evil depending on the dose. So just like this person says, this is a common reference or example that I use, is that water, if you drink too much water, you can die from hyperhydration. It's extremely difficult to do, but it can happen. Most people think of water as being quote unquote good, but
You can die from it.
you sure can. I think Primal, go hard, do whatever works. Reese's Puffs can go to hell though.
Dude, I
Lol.
love Reese's Puffs.
I also like Reese's Puffs. I was thinking about this song earlier when I was typing up my slides. I've eaten an ungodly amount of saturated fats, and it didn't feel so keto. Just tuning in, but appreciate any rethinking of food and lifestyle. But nice. Yeah, saturated fat, I would say, is one of like the actual, I don't know if I'd call it it in of itself a nutrient, but I would say one of the classes of like foods that has like some pretty negative data. Again, you can allow for a certain amount in your daily intake, but there is there's lots of evidence that going over, I think the recommended now is 30% of your fat intake. If you go over that, then we start to see we might start to see some bad stuff. She's saying glyconutrients, okay. FODMAPs had me thinking hard about sugar. Turns out cauliflower and Brussels sprouts and avocado was the best thing for me. I always forget what this acronym is. It has to do with gas producing.
Yeah, I've never heard of that.
What the heck? It has to do with like nightshades, like different classes of vegetables, especially in tubers like onions and peppers and oh, I can't remember what it is though. Inviting fruit. Okay, I guess I understood sucrose and high fructose corn syrup to be harmful because of the way it's metabolized, i.e., only by the liver, which produces lots of VLDL and fats. So VLDL being very low density lipoproteins and fats. Okay, so the mechanism is present that de novo lipogenesis, which is just the creation of fat, so triglycerides in general, does occur. It does not necessarily lead to VLDL or like fat deposition, right? So synthesizing or creating fat is much different than actually like storing fat in a place that you don't want it to be stored, say on your hips or on your belly or wherever you don't want it to go. So just because something is getting metabolized in the liver and this de novo lipogenesis begins does not necessarily mean it's going to be deposited and stored as fat anywhere. It just means, hey, we will create some as a substrate. And again, that balance is going to massively depend on the energy intake, that energy balance equation. So I wouldn't say like it's metabolized like poorly, right? Like sucrose is a combination of glucose and fructose. When you get glucose from other sources, would you believe glucose is metabolized badly? Or would you, if you get fructose from fruit, is it metabolized poorly? So the exact same idea and logic applies to as soon as it becomes like in this category that people view negatively as like table sugar or high fructose corn syrup being bad, it's gotten a really bad rap. But like why is the fructose from high fructose corn syrup worse than the fructose from fruit? You know, like they're going to be metabolized in similar ways. And I would say like fruit as a whole is better than straight up HFCS because now you get an environment of other nutrients when the fruit goes in, include especially fiber. Fiber is again one of the ones that has the bigger a large effect during during intake. But isolating out those different monosaccharides, glucose versus fructose, it's and then saying it's metabolized like in a poor way or a bad way is just like is not necessarily the case. And we know VLDL causes cardiovascular disease because it causes plaque to build up in your arteries. Yeah, so VLDL can definitely have poor outcomes or high levels of VLDL or LDL in general. I think VLDL is like a fairly new category, very low density lipoproteins as opposed to just LDL. But I don't think so. Maybe you've seen some information that's different, or maybe you've seen a study that tried to lead to this conclusion that fructose or sucrose itself leads to increased VLDL. And if that is what you're under the if that's the impression you're under, I would challenge that, and I would definitely take another look at exactly what that study tried to do.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment, dude. Because the only thing I'll say is like when I see people, and there's nothing wrong with like having conversations like this, but this is how you can kind of see like why the situation continues to get worse because the start point is so bad. You know, like people are not assessing the actual situation because they're going to like one-off, very, very, very specific situations like VLDL causing cardiovascular disease. It's like, guys, heart disease is one of the main killers, and it's primarily done by obesity, right? That's the main causation of this. So it's just it's kind of crazy because I always see people talking about like weird little one-off things like this instead of like the basics that we are talking about in our first like 3 or 4 episodes. And I'm like, guys, that's the foundation for fixing the problem. This is like, even if this was the case for some group of people that were having issues with cardiovascular disease, like it's not what the data is showing. Most of it's just showing because we're obese and have limited activity levels. That's about it. You know, we can get into the nitty gritty of all this small stuff. It's just because I see, as long as that kind of dictates the conversation as a whole, I don't think we're going to be able to come to a real solution on it.
Yeah.
And I think you know what I mean when I say that. You know, like a real solution is only going to come when people are willing to just be like, okay, yeah, actually it is energy balance. Okay, yeah, actually it is. It's cultural issues. It's, you know, holiday-based issues. It's, you know, peer pressure issues. It's lack of education, and it's at a core concept and level, obesity and lack of activity levels. And what are the simplest things to help fix those in the most positive and direct manner? It's not conversations like that.
Yeah.
You know, that's outside of the topic here, but because in a way it's not wrong, like you said, you know, so it's not like I'm knocking any of it. It's just, it's like, doesn't matter, you know, it's like, it's just, I wish I had a good example for it, but I just see so much of this kind of like the sugar thing. Sugar's so bad. It's like the whole core concept's being missed.
Yeah.
The whole problem as a whole is being missed, and we can't have an honest conversation about it, which means the solution is never going to be created until we get everybody back to this like core level of understanding. And I thought you did a great job, man. I thought you did a great job of quickly blending in most, if not all, of the scientific aspects of it without going too crazy into detail. And then just being like, hey, here's what it is. I mean, you can either accept it or not, but the second you can accept it, you're much better off for it, and you'll be much more effective in your strategies, understanding this stuff, because your strategies will be unique and specific to you. Maybe you are someone who has a specific situation like Inviting Freedom came up with, but I can assure you it ain't the masses, you know? And yeah, that was some really good stuff, man. Great job on that.
Yeah, thanks. And if you have some evidence to challenge, bring it to us. That's what this space is for. We want to encourage discourse. If you're like, hey, no man, fuck sugar, here's the reason why. bring it to us. That's the kind of stuff I love talking about. Is
take a walk and smile about a 5-5-5-5. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yep, that's basically it, man. That's what we're telling you guys. You do that with the calorie managing and the energy balance managing and whatever strategy that you see that fits you best and allows you to maintain overall health, which is what we're likely both just going to continue to see over and over again until we die. Yes, absolutely, man. Don't overcomplicate it. Let this be as simple as it needs to be, because it is simple. Like when Richard Hart speaks about crypto and it being simple and not your keys, not your coins, and understanding key concepts, this is all we're doing here. Remove the fluff, remove the noise, remove the cloudiness, and it makes everything so much more clear. You can make the right decisions and immediately start moving forward at a pace that you likely have not in the past. Just like with crypto, just like with what Richard does in the space. And you see so much nonsense, so many people getting wrecked. We see people getting wrecked here, continually not being able to lose weight, continually not being able to look and feel the way they want, and continually not being able to live a healthy lifestyle in a way that makes sense in American culture and outside of it. It's not much different elsewhere, to be honest. But yeah, the walk in a 5-5-5-5 steak sounds nice right about now.
The nitty gritty of nutrition is for those on the cusp of their goals. The mindset of fitness is getting after it every day. Let's go. Let's go. Yeah, thanks for being here, Gam.
Gam, I love it, brother. Man, I was expecting more people to come in here and be really angry about sugar, but I guess it's good that we didn't. I guess it's good.
Yeah.
Then they can maybe come back and watch it while it's not live, and then maybe they'll put a comment or something.
Some replays and some comments.
Yeah.
But yeah, otherwise, pretty similar approach that is going to be taken, I think, by both of us, is that like, hey, before we go and before classifying anything as evil or bad or good, let's take an actual like in-depth look at what it is we're talking about and make a decision from there.
100%, man. This is a pretty chill episode, man. This is like one of the most chill ones we've had.
Yeah, I agree.
Like the sugar comments stuff come out on like the most random topics.
Yeah.
Like they just get like interjected in. We have an actual, constructive conversation about it, and just
Yeah.
like no one shows. It's okay. It's good, honestly. Less noise to go through. So I appreciate the people being here. Anybody got any extra questions for us? Anything at all
Yeah.
before we round things up?
If you are still sticking around, give us a question if you got it, and if not, we'll wrap things up in the next couple of
Yeah.
minutes. I
Just
think,
scam.
yeah,
Jumped on the fort.
do your clients that you deal with day in and day out, do you get a lot of talk about sugar, Ryan, would you say?
So the group, Lose Weight Pizza, that I run on Facebook,
Mm-hmm.
it does a really good job of kind of what we're doing now with this channel. So when people come to me, even if they have like 3 to 4 decades of bad habits and relationships with food, they kind of have a good understanding that sugar is not necessarily cause, it's their emotional relationship to things based on many, many, many years, right?
Mm.
Of potentially bad habits, bad experiences, or just repeated behavior,
Yeah.
behaviorisms. So if I have a client, for example, that's drinking, 12 Mountain Dews a day, they are understanding that sugar is not necessarily the cause of this, but weaning them off and getting them up to a higher calorie count, regulating hunger, understanding the process, showing them the data, communicating daily, like all those things need to go into how someone can, you can almost like reassess someone's relationship with these things and slowly, like get them away. You can't just be like, boom, light switch, the sugar goes away. Cause like some people have said, sugar in large doses over a large period of time, especially as you're gaining weight, like all these things can really compound on each other and
Mm.
almost create an even more unhealthy relationship with said foods, said experiences, right? So ironically, and I don't even think it's ironically, because the group does an amazing job. And shout out to Jesse, who is the creator of the group, and I co-run it with him. Does a really good job of just getting right down to the nitty gritty of the truths, and just being a really open space for people to be vulnerable there and talk about their experiences, calorie counting and stuff, because it's a really, really tough time
Mm.
to lose weight in America. It's really shitty out there right
Yeah.
now. This is
Yeah.
the worst I've ever seen it. And I've been doing it for a long time. And yeah, culture has changed. It's a very dynamic environment now. Everybody's very stressed. We're working a lot more. There is work from home, but there's problems with that too. Kids are going back home from school. They're coming back to school. They're the mask situation, like all this stuff, so everybody is very tense. We're all very stressed.
Yeah.
And if you already had a misunderstanding of this process before and you didn't have the data, you didn't have the structure and the foundation that makes sense, I hate to break it to people, but you got probably screwed when the lockdowns happened and your calorie intake likely went up, activity levels likely went down, and you didn't have any understanding of that. It's like going into a really serious financial situation in your life and you just don't even have a bank account, or you're not even tracking it, and you haven't tracked it for 5 years. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah.
Like it's going to be bad news bears. So, but yeah, to answer your question, yeah, not necessarily. It's more so if there is a dependence on it emotionally,
Mm-hmm.
psychologically, how do we adapt that? What makes best sense? Does weight loss even make sense in the current set of parameters, right? And what kind of structure could lead to the best success, the best outcome, given the person's situation?
Mm. Cool. That's pretty cool for that size of group. I'd say.
Yeah,
I
dude.
mean,
Honestly, it's like the moderation is getting pretty wild these days, is because the amount of people we just clicked like 55, 56K, man. We're going up like at least 1 to 2,000 a month now, people at least. And yeah, larger group, more
mm-hmm.
opinions, more loud opinions, you know
Mm-hmm.
how that goes, but the moderators do a great job. And yeah, it's so far so good, man. I mean, I'm worried as it gets bigger, things get more dicey as always, just like with Hex audience. As the Hex
Mm-hmm.
audience grows, you're going to have more people complaining. You're going to have more people that aren't really about it. You're going to have yada, yada, yada,
Yeah.
But yeah, it does good. I fear the day that it eventually can't do what it's doing now, because there's so
Yeah.
many people. But I don't know, man. I feel like when someone is ready to join a group like that and they see all the content, they see people talking, it's more of an acceptance thing. Once you're accepting that this does work, even if it hasn't worked for you yet, then like you're ready. And I feel like a lot of people are at that point when they come to the group. Like there's not a whole lot of people who are like, oh, you see, this just doesn't work for me. This is
Yeah.
why I had to do no sugar. That comes here and there, but like the group is so pure in that way. Like I don't want it to turn into like a cult by any means, but like it's very, very like good at immediately kind of correcting, misinformation, if you will, in a way
Hmm.
that's positive, because obviously
Yeah.
there's you can cross the line with that too, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that's
That's
been
cool.
great. Honestly, that's been great. Yeah, for sure. I actually haven't had to do too much sugar stuff, to be honest with you. You know, most people are really comfortable now with tracking apps. Most people are really comfortable with like understanding costs with food and stuff, which is
Mm-hmm.
great. Because to me, that's development. That's progression.
Yeah.
Even if we're nowhere near where we need to be, that's still progression, which is important to point out. People are more accepting of the responsibility that comes with this stuff. Whether or not they actually get good at it and make it make sense and get a structure and process that works for the long term is another thing entirely. But at least accepting the fact that there are costs here is a big first step. Because it's like going to college, man. If you go to college for 40 years, and you still don't have your bachelor's, people are gonna be like, what the hell is going on here?
Yeah.
Like they
Yeah.
would just straight up laugh at you, like, dude, what is wrong with this situation? Well, why aren't we doing the same thing with nutrition, guys? If you don't make it work and you can't look good and feel good and be in the higher levels of overall health all the time, the facts are that something is missing. And it's
Mm-hmm.
okay to admit that you don't know what you're doing or you need mentorship or you need like some sort of, improvements to be made. Because like, to
Yeah.
be honest, I would be lying if I said I was as rich as Richard Hart, because I'm not. I need mentorship and that stuff. I'm not going to act like I know what I'm doing, with creating these projects he's doing and being as rich as he is and all that stuff. But I can say the same for nutritional elements and representing the part. So yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
like a responsibility, awareness, and like an acceptance of that responsibility that I've seen a lot of really good improvement. The solution side of things is still dicey from my
Mm-hmm.
experience with the large group that we have. Because we get people from like Lose It. I told you about that in our one stream. We get people from like MyFitnessPal coming in
Yeah.
because it's a really good focus group, really. And since I'm in there every day and have been there for 2 years, like you see the trends almost form before it hits the country. It's kind of weird. But yeah, so I've seen progress and acceptance of responsibility, but the structure analysis and the mindset and the psychology is like almost going backwards right now, which is
Mm-hmm.
sad to say, largely because of the cultural elements that are going on right now, in my opinion. And there's just
Right.
not enough help out there. There's not enough help, no mentorship, no education. So of course people are going to get worse probably. You give
Mm-hmm.
them the lockdowns and everything. So yeah, I don't want to ramble too much, but good question.
Well, should that about do it, you reckon?
I think so. I think so. I think people are probably pretty sick of hearing about sugar at this point. The ones that stayed on the whole time.
All right. That's gonna be it then, you guys. That was my little rant or my little preacher moment. I got up on my soapbox, got my slides going about sugar. I encourage you to be skeptical and be critical about
Yeah,
claims
always.
in general. And yeah, just to try to stay away from this it is like a pretty normal thing that we tend to do. I think it's just like a human nature thing, maybe a little more so in the West when we're looking to kind of categorize or point fingers or blame. We're looking for some sort of one quick answer, quick fix type of thing. And to just try to stray away from that temptation and to investigate thoroughly, critically, and skeptically. Be a scientist. Put your scientist hat on. Next week, as per usual, Monday, we will be here 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. I'm
Got
not
the
sure what we're
time zones
talking
on
about
there.
next week, but we'll be more so in line with our usual stuff where we're trying to build off of previous episodes and
Yeah.
provide the foundations for you to do all this stuff on your own.
Yeah, we'll have to think about what the next one is.
Yeah. But if you were here, thanks for being here. And if you are watching this on replay and you're like, these guys are full of shit, bring your sugar shit to me. Bring your sugar shit to me next week and we'll talk about it then. And I think other than that, that is it. That is all for now. So thank you and good night.